servanthood, devotion, proclamation, mission. At NOBTS and Leavell College, these 4 ideas are not just the components of our mission statement. They are the core of who we are as a people. They're our guiding principles as we seek to honor Christ. They are the foundation on which all our initiatives are built. This year, we want to give you a glimpse into that mission. We want to show you why we do what we do. So join us on this journey and learn from our amazing people as we explore our mission.
As we think about being a servant, I'm reminded of the importance of prayer. Prayer and servanthood go hand in hand. My understanding of prayer is that communion with God. It's a relationship with Him. It's not, as we all know, it's not simply going to Him with our request, to tell Him things that He doesn't know or to beg for His intervention, though it is an opportunity to lay those things that are heavy upon our hearts in front of Him, knowing that He will take care of them. But I believe that prayer is just that opportunity to be in a relationship, to know Him and to be known by Him. I think that's what God has called us to do, is to be in that continual prayer relationship with Him. As far as being a servant, something unique happens when we are following Christ as a servant and when we're praying. One of the things that happens is, first of all, it does remind us of who we are. We discover when we are in the presence of God, when we are in a relationship with Him, when we're praying, we're reminded simply that we are saved, and we are saved by His grace. We are children of God, and He's our Father. It puts in perspective who we are. We're reminded He's God and we're not. We're reminded as children of God, even as servants of God, that it is an overwhelming opportunity that He has given for us to be in a relationship with Him. And then as we are in His presence, we're also reminded of the simple truth that we're called. We are each and every person called to be a servant of Christ, to be His. We're not only reminded whose we are, we also are reminded why we're here. As we spend time with God in prayer, we hear the echoes, for example, of the Lord's Prayer, where He says, "Hallowed be your name and your kingdom come." We're reminded in prayer that really life is not about us, it's about Him. We live for Him. We live for His honor. We live for His glory. This goes against everything in the world. And as we spend time with Him, we're reminded of His greatness, of His goodness, of His holiness, that He is a perfect God, and that He alone is the one who is worthy of praise. And so instead of being concerned about ourselves, prayer takes us into the very presence of God and reminds us that really the reason we live is to be His servant so that we can bring Him the glory that He alone deserves. It certainly is good for our perspective. It's good for our hearts to just be reminded of that incredible relationship with Him and that really we do live for Him. Another thing I believe that happens when we spend time with God in prayer as a servant is we're reminded that we really can't do this without Him. It answers the question, so how can we be a servant? In our own selves and left to ourselves, we find ourselves wanting to do things of our own power, and oftentimes we find ourselves as individuals who want to do things for ourselves. In all honesty, probably with few people, servanthood and being a servant doesn't come natural. But yet when we are in the presence of God and we recognize who He is and we recognize this is why we live for His honor and for His glory, then we discover the how. How can we do this? We can do it because He's the one who is at work through us. Zechariah reminds us when God speaks and He says, "It's not by might, it's not by power, it's by my Spirit." And suddenly we find within our lives the ability to be the servant that Christ has called us to be, and to find it extremely fulfilling because we recognize it's really not about us, but it's God's Spirit working through us. And that reminds me of the last thing that stands out in my mind as I consider the importance of prayer and being a servant. As we spend time with God in prayer, it gives us the opportunity to understand we're not a servant of God. We are a servant of God. What an incredible privilege the God who made the universe, the God who is holding all things together, as Paul reminds us in Colossians, the God who has made a way for us to be in a relationship with Him, the God of all grace and all mercy, has offered the opportunity for us to spend our lives following Him as a servant, bringing honor and glory to Him because He alone is worthy. And suddenly we discover it's not a burden, it's not a problem, it's not a pain, but instead it is an incredible privilege to be a servant of Christ. It's the reason John the Baptist says in John chapter 3, verse 30, which is my theme verse for my life, John says this, John says, He must increase, referring to God. He must increase, but I must decrease. I believe as we spend time with God in prayer, we discover who He is. And in the process of discovering who He is, we discover who we are. We discover what opportunity He has presented to us so that we can serve Him. And then we understand all of this is an incredible gift from God, an incredible blessing that He has placed into our lives. That's the reason we believe without any question that God has called us to prepare servants to walk with Christ, to proclaim His truth, and to fulfill His mission.